Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 725th edition of the Feuerstein's Fire American Soccer Show. I'm your host, Daniel Feuerstein. I'll give you American perspective, our clubs, leagues, players, national team, and other fabulous moments. Get your daily reading from me and other writers over at Beyond the 90, over at beyondthe90.substack.com, and locally at New York Soccer over at baddogsports.com. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, come on in. The chat room on YouTube is open. Come on in and discuss amongst yourselves if you like. You have a question for me, I'll try to answer it to the best of my abilities. And of course, don't forget to subscribe over here for your daily American soccer content. You know, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to count the days when the FIFA World Cup will be here, it's going to be exciting. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I personally cannot wait when we get to this summer. It's going to be fun, exciting, and to see all these nations, 48 of them, of course, 45 of them qualified, while the 3 in the United States, Mexico, and Canada got automatic qualification. It's going to be exciting, and it's going to be fun to watch. But you know what else is fun? I'll tell you what else is fun. History. History is knowledge, and knowledge is power. And when you sit down and you wonder about the history of the game in this country and what our players have done, whether domestically or internationally, it's a lot of fun. Pardon me. And so while it's great that we have the Soccer Hall of Fame over in Frisco, Texas, and while it's fantastic that we have people who are dedicated of preserving the history of the game in our country, we still fail to stick with it in some aspects. And while we have, obviously, we always know about the 1950 World Cup where the USA defeated England 1-0. We have that great 2002 World Cup run where we get to the quarterfinals for the first time ever as a national team, where we defeated Portugal, drew South Korea, lost to Poland, but South Korea defeated Portugal to put us into the round of 16 and knocked off Mexico 2-0 when we fell to Germany 1-0 in the quarterfinals. And we also talk about the first World Cup in 1930, the only run to the semifinals, and unfortunately falling to Argentina and then losing to the third place match. And then the big run that we had qualifying for the World Cup from 1990 all the way down till 2014, where we failed to qualify for the World Cup for the first time in a long time in 2018. Now it's 2 consecutive World Cups after qualifying for Qatar 2022, and now hosting as a tri-host for 2026. History is important. History of this game is important for us. Even though some will say, well, there's not enough history to go around, but in reality there is. We have history. We do. For the many years that this national team has qualified for the World Cup and has escaped the group stage, it has been tremendous. The only times we've been out of the group stage of going 3 and out, of course, France in 1998, back in Italy 1990, that's the start-off point. And then, of course, Germany in 2006. Those are the 3 times that I do remember our men's national team not getting out of the group stage, going 3 and done. So it has happened, positive and negative. And the negatives, of course, Copa America in 2024, kicked out, 3 and done as the host nation. Not qualifying for the 2018 World Cup in Russia. That was the first time in a very long time we haven't been to a World Cup. It's all about the good and it's all about the bad. If we don't mix the two together, we have no history. And that's why it's important, very important, to always pay attention to those people that do hunt for history, depending on whatever tournament it is. Gold Cups, World Cups, Copa Americas, qualification to a World Cup. Excuse me, sorry about that. It's important to know. It's very, very important to know that if we don't have our history and we don't remember it, then everything is going to fall apart. And then everyone's going to say, well, this will never happen. That's never happened. Well, this is a lie. That's a lie. We can't have that, folks. We can't. And even though we've had moments in this country where we've had great moments in the club game, whether it was the original American Soccer League way back when, the North American Soccer League, now MLS, USISL, now USL, Open Cup, great goals, great moments. We must always remember and preserve our American soccer history. As it may not be as glamorous as it was a long, long time ago. It may not be fun now as it was then, but maybe it is now. We always must document the history of our game in this country from start to finish. And we cannot find ways to lose it. It's very important. Just as great memories of the 1994 World Cup was when it came to our shores back in the day, to now in 2026, even though we share it with the Canadians and the Mexicans. The truth is they are our partners in this World Cup. And even though they bring competition to us, without the help and the partnership, this whole World Cup would be nothing. Even though I still feel we could have done it all by ourselves, but to include Mexico and Canada into this, I think it's a very good partnership and it's a wonderful partnership. And I'm glad that we have everyone together in the North Zone of CONCACAF. And once again, we just have to remember, it's important to remember our history. It's important to remember what has happened before we were born, while we are living, and well after we are gone. And that is why you hope somewhere down the road, we have these wonderful people that want to become caretakers of the game, the keepsakes of the game, the documentation, the video evidence, the written evidence, the photo evidence, everything and anything that goes on with the game, no matter how it is digitized, no matter how it's disseminated. The history of the game is absolutely important to all of us. Baseball will have their history. Hockey will have its history. The NFL, American football will have its history. Basketball will have its history. European football will always have its history no matter what. There will always be people in Europe that will document whatever goes on within their countries and whatever goes on with the national teams and internationally as a whole. If we don't keep that close to the vest, we risk losing that. We cannot risk losing that history. Things have happened. You just need people not to be lazy, and you just need people to understand why it's important to document the game in this country. And thank goodness we have a Hall of Fame. Thank goodness we have the history to back up what happened. It's not a fraud. It's not a fluke. It was not made up. It happened. Our national team went to the semifinals in the 1930 World Cup. Our country has knocked off the mighty English in the 1950 World Cup in Belo Horizonte. Our national team went to the quarterfinals for the first time ever in the 2002 World Cup when we were in South Korea and Japan. Unfortunately, we fell in Trinidad and Tobago, losing to the Soka Warriors and being eliminated from qualifying for the World Cup in Russia in 2018. After 2 matches where we lost to Ghana in regulation in the group stage, we lost to them in the round of 16 in extra time. We finally got our revenge in Brazil in 2014 in the first group stage match, and that was by John Brooks as the first American substitute to score a goal in the World Cup. Clint Dempsey has scored a World Cup goal in 3 to 4 consecutive World Cup finals. Germany in 2006, South Africa in 2010, Brazil in 2014. 3 consecutive World Cup finals. Clint Dempsey has scored goals. Landon Donovan in the 2010 World Cup in the round of 16 finally converted the first penalty by the U.S. men's national team in a World Cup match, in a knockout match. Tim Howard breaks the record and sets the all-time record for most saves in a knockout match in the World Cup in Brazil against Belgium in 2014. Even though it was a loss, he still recorded multiple saves. That is a record that is still standing today by Tim Howard. We have history, folks. History was made. England, in 3 World Cup matches, still has not defeated the United States in the finals of the World Cup. The 1950 World Cup, once again, in Belo Horizonte, 1-0. 2010 in South Africa, a 1-1 draw. Qatar in 2022, a 0-0 draw. And finally, 2022 in Qatar, the final group stage match against Iran. After losing to Iran 2-1 in France in 1998, it was Christian Pulisic in 2022 scoring the only goal of the match to win 1-0 and advancing out of the group stage. We have history. It is important to write it down. It is important to document it. It is important to tell our children, yes, the United States men's national team has created history, and it will continue to make history, whether it's in great form or in horrible form. But we do have history on our side. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about this segment's sponsor. It's Dino Luzzi Energy Drink. When I need that extra kick to power through match analysis and late night transfer rumors, there's only one drink that delivers that authentic Italian energy, Dino Luzzi. Crafted in Italy with the same passion I bring to this show, because real energy comes from real ingredients, just like real soccer talk comes from real insiders. Great show for you tonight. Now, the reason why I am doing this show now today at 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific, tonight, as we all know, it is an Open Cup night across America. So tonight's show is today, late afternoon. So I just wanted to go ahead and play my recorded interview. If you were watching this past March international window, the match between the United States and Belgium, before that match on TNT was the documentary based on the North American Soccer League called When Soccer Came Home, when soccer came here to the USA. And let me just tell you guys, I watched that religiously. I watched that tremendously. It was awesome. It was fantastic. It was basically great to see. And I have seen some of them. I've seen some of them because when soccer came to America, basically, that's what it was called. And we all know the majority of it's probably the New York Cosmos, and I understand that. And no one wants to see that happen all over again, or whatever it is. But it's very important to know why it happened and why all of this really, really came to fruition. And that is why I was lucky enough to have two people joining me in this recorded conversation. It is Mr. James Brown and, of course, Dr. David Kilpatrick from the Society of American Soccer History, also known as S.A.S.H. Those two were also in the documentary on TNT that day. You can still watch it on the HBO Max app. I've watched it at least 2, 3, 4 times already, and it still blows me away. And I'll be honest, whenever I see Shep Messing on it, it makes me feel happy to know that I've known this man and the history he has given, not just as the former goalkeeper of the New York Cosmos, but just as an American soccer icon in the New York City area, New York, New Jersey area, and in the nation here in the United States. So let's not wait any further. Here it is right now. Once again, James Brown, Dr. David Kilpatrick from the Society of American Soccer History, also known as S.A.S.H. Here we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the American Soccer Show. I'm your host once again, Daniel Feuerstein. And, this is one of those rare moments for me that I love delving into American soccer history, because we didn't have MLS without the NASL, and we wouldn't have the NASL without, of course, the American Soccer League. To join me to discuss the TNT documentary of, and once again, it is the When Soccer Came to America documentary on TNT before, of course, that friendly against Belgium over in Atlanta. Members of the Society of American Soccer History, and that is S.A.S.H. I have with me right now James Brown, of course, over in Europe and currently in Morocco for a special event for a colleague of his. And, of course, you know him as the New York Cosmos historian, the one and only David Kilpatrick, members of S.A.S.H., Society of American Soccer History. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me today. Guys, and I'll start off with James. That documentary that Turner did on TNT was absolutely amazing. I could not believe so much history back in those times when the NASL, I don't know if it was, you want to say it's peaked, but the way it exploded on our shores from New York all the way across the country.
That was, it was really well done. I thought that they made a great segue between the deep roots and history of American soccer, building up. It collapses during those dry periods, 50s, 60s, but then gets back into it. And these businessmen have a dream and it works out. And then you got the 70s where, unfortunately, that's where everybody thinks that soccer in America came from when it started. But luckily, you got people like David Kilpatrick, a great historian with the New York Cosmos, and just overall a great historian. So it was a pleasure, really, to start working on the project with ITN, the group in London, who put forth the idea. They came to me in August and said, listen, we really want to do a project before the World Cup. It's going to be a real tight deadline, but can you give us a hand and help put us in touch with people? Tell us more about the history. It's really one of those, we're in front of you, help us understand the game as it existed in America. So luckily that's where you bring in all these wonderful narrators and storytellers like David Kilpatrick.
Exactly. And David, let us talk about Cosmos history, of course. The day that Pele came to Downing Stadium was unbelievable. Of course, being a kid myself from the Bronx, driving the Queens across the Triborough Bridge. Every time you go from the Bronx or from Manhattan towards Queens, you always see that dilapidated stadium on Randall's Island off of the highway. And when you see it filled to the hilt from the first row all the way to the top to see Pele in action, I mean, that's when everything really took off, didn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I was blessed to have a father who taught me how to kick a ball, how to control a ball. James, of course, comes from the most remarkable lineage in American soccer history. And his father, of course, taught him how to kick and control the ball, and his father before him. And again, the roots of the game pass right through that DNA of James. And both of us, I think, were really blessed to have the slight advantage maybe of over some of the kids in our generation. I was born in 68. James, you had to be born around the same time, I think. Yeah.
72.
Yeah. So, I went to school carrying my Pelé lunchbox, and I still have it. And, I was part of that generation where there was the real boom. But I think, people like James and I had a little bit of a step ahead of some of my classmates, and that, first day of soccer training for me officially, formally, would have been in August of 1976. And, it was a really magical time to be learning the beautiful game. And, but again, the thing with that, again, it wasn't like I was the first of my generation to discover it. My father played the game in the late 50s and early 1960s in upstate New York, where there's a rich tradition that's almost completely forgotten about. Amsterdam, New York had a vital soccer community. Schenectady, New York had a vital soccer community. My father was offered a grant and aid, kind of an early form of a scholarship to play at Union. He played basketball in Mohawk Valley instead, but soccer was being played in the United States. Well, really, the first modern football was invented by Charles Goodyear back in the 1840s. So, but we've forgotten that in many ways, because it is a truth that, what my father taught me to play the game with was actually my first ball was a volleyball, because soccer balls weren't that easy to find in 1975. And so, by the time 1976, 1977, the year that Pelé retires, that's when I actually had a proper soccer ball to kick around in the backyard. So just in terms of that fact of material culture, when you realize that the first basketball that James Naismith used, right? My under 15 team has a game in Springfield, Massachusetts, this Saturday. So I'm going to swing by the Hall of Fame. And if you've ever been there to the Basketball Hall of Fame, you'll see the very first basketball was a soccer ball. So how is that in 1894, the first basketball was a soccer ball, but in 1975, my father had to teach me how to play soccer with a volleyball because there was nowhere to buy a soccer ball anywhere nearby. But within a year and two, that completely changed. Why? Because of Pelé. Yeah. So, the documentary does an amazing job, and the title is a play on words from what Pelé said in rather broken English, right? He had Professor Julio Mazet, his dear friend and mentor, was serving as translator in that press conference. And, the fact that at Downing Stadium, he went out there and Charles Catone and some other Cosmos staff literally had to spray paint the field green. Pelé gets into the locker room and thinks he's got some kind of crazy virus that's going to ruin his feet and therefore ruin his career. No, it's just the spray paint, It's amazing how far we've come to the well-manicured lawns that those under 15s that I'm coaching are so used to. We've come a long way, baby. And Pelé, the signing of Pelé by the Cosmos was most certainly the catalyst. But, as James is already intimating in terms of those waves, right? When you look at the first professional league in 1894, look at the economic crisis they were going through. Look at the surging American Soccer League. James's grandfather played for the New York Soccer Giants, the team I'm obsessed with. His grandfather played for the New York Soccer Giants, one of the best teams in the world in the 1920s. That's why the United States finished third in the 1930 inaugural World Cup. But how many Americans are taking pride in that? How many Americans are aware of that? Why? Because, again, the American Soccer League collapses in the Great Depression. We forget 1984, 1985. 1985 was a catastrophic year for my family financially. That was the year that the NASL collapsed. So, a lot of blame is placed on the Cosmos for overspending. It's absurd, really, when you understand what the ownership group, Warner Communication, was going through in terms of its investments, corporate takeovers, the movement towards what we now kind of have become accustomed to with austerity budgeting, right? The Gordon Geckos, in many ways, were getting a hold of corporate entities that might have invested in some kind of a long-term range. And as the documentary, I think, shows, had we hosted that 86 World Cup, I think things may well have been sustained, and we wouldn't be going through so many growth spurts, right? So, I've got those pennants, the sport of the 80s, the NASL official slogan, and on coffee mugs and notepads and pennants and T-shirts. And here we are still thinking, okay, as we're on the cusp of this World Cup, maybe this will really be the catalyst to really kind of push us beyond that tipping point to finally make soccer the preeminent sport here. And people like James and I think that would be for the good of society.
Me too. Yeah. I absolutely agree. And James, I want to go to you about that. Of course, we always talk about Bethlehem Steel, obviously those 5 Open Cup championships that they've won. And the history of that corporation bringing in so many people, not just to work at the steel mill, but those same people that worked there played for the team and won those championships. And, they built the first ever soccer stadium, that little brick hut that Moravian College uses for their college football games, which I've seen not in person, but I have seen not only in the little documentary that MLS did about Bethlehem Steel, and of course now, going on Google Maps and seeing it for myself and seeing a vintage picture of it, or I guess a painting of it, whatever you want to call it, back in the day. How many corporations own these clubs in the ASL that unfortunately succumbed to the Great Depression back in the day?
Well, it was a very interesting cohabitation, right? You look back at the late 1890s and, you have baseball owners who are, they're pretty much creating these soccer teams so that they can fill their stadiums, in the wintertime. And so when they have no one in there, okay, we're going to fill it up with a sport that it could be and pretty much is our competitor. But then you see all of these corporations, they could be textile related, steel, coal. There is always an association, and we kind of bring it back to the Scottish connection. You've got these companies coming over, investing. It could be homegrown, they could be homemade, like Bethlehem Steel, but it's that influence of the immigrants coming over who are joining those companies, and those companies are saying, wow, look at this, look at our employees, and look what they brought with them. They brought this ball. And, that was extremely important, because these owners said, hey, you know what? It's a good way for fellowship and brotherhood, within the company, but it's also a great way to make money. When it comes down to it, it was a great way for them to promote their name, their brand. It's pretty much free advertising every weekend, especially, and then when you get into to Open Cups and everything. So it's a very interesting way of seeing how can we benefit. How can we grow the game? How can we use all of this immigrant influence, the game of soccer in America, it's an immigrant game, since the very beginning. So I think we're very fortunate to have people who believed in the game to bankroll it.
Exactly. And then, of course, unfortunately, it all collapses. And then, there's this, I guess, giant void that comes around. And then, of course, we jump into the, further into the documentary, David, when England won the 1966 World Cup as the host nation. But was that the first televised World Cup across the globe?
I believe those satellite broadcasts were the first of their kind in terms of, I know there was a gathering at Madison Square Garden. I know Werner Roth went to it, in fact, right, to watch the 66 final being broadcast live. But really, the 1970 World Cup was really kind of the first Technicolor World Cup, if you will, right? So, and what a side in that Brazilian team to really celebrate the beautiful game. And again, I would say that that's a really important part in terms of, the maestro, the King Pelé arriving, right? This wasn't just some great sportsman being paid more money than anybody ever before. He was an artist. And it wasn't a matter of, football and art. No, this was football as art. And the idea of playing the game in a certain way. So I do think it needs to be said and fairly understood as well, right? The style of football, the style of soccer that was played, the Scots invented the combination game. But when you look at some of the archival footage that's available now, that, S.A.S.H has done a great job. Members have really pulled together resources, and hint, if anybody wants to make a lasting contribution to American soccer history, help support us in our fundraising efforts to further digitize some of this material, and make it more available to the public. But in the documentary, When Soccer Comes to America, which, as you say, debuted on TNT, but everybody can watch this on HBO Max. It's streaming on HBO Max now. But when James comes into the film, there's some incredible footage from the 1920s where you really get to see what soccer looked like then. So, the massive games of Hakoah, Vienna, when those players came over in the late 1920s and filled the polo grounds, playing the Giants, playing the all-star teams, right? These massive crowds that set records that weren't broken until Pelé's Cosmos at Giant Stadium in 1977, right? Those records from the Giants that the Giants set at the polo grounds weren't overcome in 1975 when Pelé arrived. They weren't overcome at Yankee Stadium when Cosmos moved from Downing Stadium back to Yankee Stadium. Those records were finally broken, right? The records that were broken when James's grandfather was playing in the ASL, those records were finally broken in 1977. I think listeners may want to note there's a great book by our dear friend Roger Alloway called From Corner Offices and Corner Kicks, or is it Corner Kicks, Corner Offices, James? Right, Roger Alloway, where he literally looks at Bethlehem Steel and New York Cosmos as two case studies, and it really paints that picture of those communities like Harrison, New Jersey, Kearney, New Jersey, and of course Paterson, New Jersey, where the Cosmos are playing now. Rather poetically, I would say. There's a kind of historical, poetic beauty to the fact that this town of Paterson that had silk textile immigrants with connections from Macclesfield, England, right? So it was Macclesfield to Paterson, but then West Dunbartonshire, Scotland, to Kearney and Harrison. Kilpatrick, right? My surname traces my own legacy to West Dunbartonshire, where so many of these great Scotch professors hailed from. But by the 1920s, some of that combination play had been lost a little bit. And you get this Hakoah Vienna team coming over, playing this artistic football. And then some of those players from Hakoah Vienna, thank God they joined the Cosmos, or excuse me, so thank God they joined the Giants. You can see how my brain works with these teams, right? Right. Some of them like Bela Gutmann, right? I was in Lisbon year before last, and at Benfica Stadium, there's this statue when you walk in to the VIP area of Bela Gutmann. He played for the New York Giants. He played for there's the midfielder. There's your number 10 for the New York Soccer Giants, Bela Gutmann, and there's a statue to him. But I'm talking to people at Benfica. They had no idea he played in New York, right? But so yeah, these corporations kind of divest, and as with 1894, the corporate investment, things collapse. Other investors then become really gun shy. But the 1966 World Cup, to loop back to your question, right, again, serves as a catalyst for investors willing to get back into the game. So, by 1970, it just so happens Atlantic Record executives Neshui and Ahmet Erdogan, Steve Ross, who owned the company Kenny that became Warner Communications, was trying to keep them in charge of the record label that they'd acquired as part of the massive media conglomerate, right? And they said, okay, yeah, we want to own a football club. But Ahmet was a Galatasaray fan. Neshui was a Fenerbahce fan. So they didn't want to invest in any Turkish football club, right? So then they went fishing. Where'd they go fishing? Well, those brothers knew how to throw a party. And we did that in Mexico, and Phil Wisnam, another, kind of in that legacy of proselytizers for the beautiful game, kind of finangled his way into the party and got them to realize that, they're in New York now. That would be a great place to have a team. And the NASL didn't have a team in New York. RKO General had backed out of the Generals, right? So Madison Square Garden and its investment in the Skyliners in 67. RKO General and its investment in the Generals in 67, 68, right? By 1969, 70, there's no team representing New York in what is ostensibly first division soccer in the United States. So thanks to that, those corporate connections, people with a love of football kind of in their DNA, there's the investment to, again, try to bring soccer back to cultural, relevance. And that happened to such a degree when James and I were kids, right? And Daniel, you remember it. I don't want to age you out here too, but you remember what it was like, right? When when Giant Stadium was filled with 70,000 plus, and the Cosmos were back page news every bit as much as the Yankees that memorable 1977. Certainly there were some real hot days and some really dark nights, and some really scary stories out there. But the magical story that was happening at the Meadowlands is one that I have to say, these filmmakers, Oliver Price, the director, in particular, really deserves kudos for his curiosity and care with which he approached the topic.
Everybody in that team, in that ITN production team was so enthusiastic and curious. And, from the first researching interviews that were done since August or, last summer, up until they finally got the commission for the project in early January. That's such a tough turnaround time, and they had to book it over to the US just for the month of February to do all of these interviews, crossing the states left, right, and center. Luckily being able to meet up and with David and all these other wonderful people. I have to say that with soccer is it's a huge world, but a small community, especially in the New York, New Jersey area. Because I don't know how many times, David, I came to you and I'm like, hey, David, do you know this guy or that guy? And then it's like going over to Arnie Ramirez and saying, hey, Arnie, I got this lead on this guy. Yeah, can you get in touch? Yeah, sure. Here you go. Boom, boom. Everybody is always willing to share when it comes to soccer. So that we were able to connect these people with a really well-rounded perspective of that story. You go from reporters to administrators to players, adversaries, opponents. It's extremely important for the viewing audience who might not know anything about that period to be able to get that 360-degree look. So that was wonderful.
No, it really was. And, I have to admit, hearing and seeing, hearing former voices for play-by-play, like Jim Carvallis, of course, he was the New York Knicks broadcaster. He was on TV, the New York Cosmos broadcaster. Also to see from, WNYW, which of course is Channel 5 in New York, to see Bill Mazer once again on my TV screen was just unbelievable. And I was like, the funny story about Mr. Mazer is I actually met him at Carnegie Deli. I met him. He just came in as me and my parents. And I think it was friends of theirs. We met them over there at Carnegie Deli. We were just leaving and I just saw him walk in and it was great. I didn't bother him, but I recognized him and it was really cool. And I was like, oh my God, it's Bill Mazer from Channel 5.
Kids nowadays don't understand you didn't have cell phones to do any selfies with in those moments.
Exactly. Because there were no cell phones back in the day. You couldn't do this. And, hey, there we go. You couldn't do that anymore. It was a handshake. You hoped you had a camera on you, and that was it. Didn't happen. But you know what? It was really nice to see him like in person and in living color. I
think that's the thing.
I was a teenager at the time.
Yeah, in terms of this film, right? The footage that they gathered and the way it's edited is really, if you're of a certain age, it'll really take you through memory lane. It really will. And if you weren't around then, boy, it gives you a real exposure to it. And what was happening and how soccer became such a essential part of the zeitgeist and a really fascinating time in American history.
Yeah, it really is. And James, I have to tell you, I was shocked to learn because obviously, when you're in New York, you only know about the Cosmos. If you hear about other clubs in the NASL, it's usually in the newspapers. There was no internet back in the day either, obviously. Or if you had friends in Los Angeles or friends in Washington or friends in Tampa or in Fort Lauderdale, you give the phone call and you say, so what happened here? What was this player like or that player like? You didn't have the internet like you do now. And I never knew Sir Elton John was part owner of the Aztecs. I also did not know that former president of the U.S. Soccer Federation, Alan Rothenberg, was the owner of the Aztecs as well. And that blew my mind. I could not believe that one man you knew in music and then a man that you only knew as president of U.S. Soccer at the time who basically led the charge to bring the 94 World Cup to our country was an owner of an NASL club.
You should pick up The Big Bounce, Alan's new book, which gives his perspective. I will say too, his perspective on going all the way back to the LA Wolves winning the I think the two leagues, right? That was the United Soccer Association's title match. An incredible story, that championship match as well. And I was blessed when I was the years that I was down in Memphis, Tennessee. I was coached by a number of former players there. Charlie Cook, who's still involved with Corver coaching, and Tony Field, who passed away a couple of years ago, played for the Cosmos before he joined the Memphis Rogues. Mm-hmm. And Bobby Thompson, who is on that LA Wolves side. Now he played for Wolverhampton Wanderers, but they represented Los Angeles in that league. And Rothenberg worked for Jack Kent Cooke, who also owned the Washington Redskins, right? and was the one who owned the LA Wolves. So Rothenberg's rise to power in American soccer, again, he gives his perspective on it. But he came to U.S. soccer with that background from even the pre-NASL, the year before the two leagues merged to form the NASL in 1968, right? So just so people understand, right, that the 66 World Cup serves as this catalyst for investment. 1967, there's groups of investors and who try to create professional soccer clubs, and that manifests in two different competing leagues. The NPSL, which tries to form more traditional teams along the North American franchise model more than anything, but also the United Soccer Association. So here in New York, we had two teams sharing the same stadium, but unfortunately they were also sharing that stadium with the primary tenant, who happened to be the Yankees. So you had the Skyliners, who were really Chero, and you had the Generals, who were owned by RKO General. Within a year, the leagues merged. But Rothenberg's background in soccer as an attorney goes back to the LA Wolves. So, yeah, I mean, listeners who want to take a deep dive on that, Alan Rothenberg's book, The Big Bounce, just came out that talks about his investment in that. But, yeah, you had celebrity soccer fans, rock stars like Elton John investing in the LA Aztecs. You had Rick Wakeman from Yes, the keyboardist from Yes. And, if you know the song Life on Mars by David Bowie, that's Rick Wakeman. If you know Cat Stevens' Morning is Broken, that beautiful piano line, that's Rick Wakeman, right? He's in this documentary film with James and I. Why? Because he was an investor in the Philadelphia Fury. So, and as he mentions there, supposedly Paul Simon was one investor too.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But Rick Wakeman says in the film he doesn't remember Paul Simon ever showing up to any of the games. But I think
silent partner.
The Erdogan's had a lot to do with this, right? Mick Jagger was an international consultant. He was right. Mick Jagger was technically a member of the Cosmos front office for a few years. I remember as a kid, and I've still got the Kick programs where I'd look in the front and you'd see Ahmet Erdogan, Neşvi Erdogan, and Mick Jagger, international consultant,
Every time he gets a sale, he sings "I Get No Satisfaction."
Well, we got a lot of satisfaction at the Meadowlands, though. We really did. And that was just part of the kind of corporate synergy, for lack of a better term, that was happening, right? We didn't really use that term back then in the 70s and 80s, right? But the corporate synergies that were firing there and that multimedia conglomerate were what were needed to really promote the sport. And, let's not kid ourselves. Modern sport is a modern construct that, different sports wax and wane through the years due to, how well interest is sustained. And the story of soccer in America is the story of America and the story of global sport, right? It's not anything new. So when did soccer come to America? Well, it had been here. In many ways, we invented the modern soccer ball. At least Charles Goodyear did. But it took a genius, an artist like Pelé, to really, get it so kids like James and I went to school with those lunchboxes.
Exactly. I mean, what I'm like, I grew up in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, about 30 minutes away from the Meadowlands. And soccer was just bursting and bubbling over, with every single neighborhood, you turn left or right, and someone's kicking a ball somewhere. It's everybody's always grabbing, okay, pickup games, go to the park. We don't have any goals. Okay, we'll just get 2 rocks or T-shirts, or we lay down our bicycles to create the goalposts. It doesn't matter, and you play until dark, and you wake up with that dream because of what you were going to see at the Meadowlands. You saw people like Ricky Davis, and you said, God, I can be like him. That was the hope, Yeah,
I idolize Ricky Davis so much, right? And that number 17 on his back when he emerged, and the whole milk and cookies persona that he had just really was such an inspiration in terms of, okay, I can do this. Then suddenly we couldn't, right? Now that's where people like, Cosmos ball boys, shall I say, like John Harkes and Tony Miola kept the faith. They kept the faith. They persevered through it, right? I slipped into a sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle in the mid to late 80s, and still kicked the ball around, but lost, I lost touch with that dream. They didn't. They carried it through, and what they achieved in '94. My deepest admiration for those guys, and I've been really blessed to get to know them a little bit, and expect to see them again at an event soon around the documentary Soccer Town USA, another great soccer documentary made by our dear friend Tom McCabe.
Tom's a great guy.
About that scene in Kearney, right? But as a kid in 1977 Memphis, every day at school we played on the concrete. Right, there were two trees that were one goal, and we'd set down bags or jackets for the other goal. I've still got a scar over this eye. My first ever scar was from slipping on the concrete when I was tackled. Because you get tackled on the concrete, but boy, you learned how to control that ball. My players, tonight I've got training on an actual grass field, right? This is the one out of our 3 training sessions a week where the other 2 were on proper field turf, but one day a week we're on natural grass, and they complain. I'm like, guys, you have no idea how nice this is. We literally, me and my friends, we'd play on concrete. We didn't think anything of it. Why? Because there was such a vibe, an atmosphere that this is the game to play. Yeah. And what that did too, in terms of lifting us out of the myopia of just playing baseball in the park. No, we were playing soccer. Why? Because it was cool. And that's what the Cosmos brought to the game in many ways. That kind of cool factor. That all of our friends, that's what we played, right?
And everybody would play, regardless of age. You had kids who were 10 years old mixing it up with 14-year-olds, 18, even into the 20s. I remember, in high school, we would go and play pickup games at AT&T Bell Laboratories in Mountainside, because one of my brother's friends from high school years back, he was working there and he played in a league. And he's like, hey, listen, we need some extra players. Come on in. So we drive up there and we're like, hey, we get to play with the old guys, and these old guys are like 25.
The summer going into 6th grade in Memphis, Tennessee, I played with the Memphis University School's varsity team all summer.
Wow.
All summer. My dad took me, like their coach said something to my dad. So my dad would drive me over. Yeah, it was happening all the time now with our age groups, and we're going through the adjustment with age groups again. Parents that are listening out there, know they're all pulling their hair out right now over this issue of, right, teams are being broken up as U.S. soccer shifts again in terms of where you do the age group cutoff. But back then, it wasn't anything for a kid going into 6th grade to be showing up and playing against kids that were going into 11th and 12th. We didn't think anything of it. I got the snot knocked out of me I remember the first 20 minutes of that, and then I adjusted. And then it was like super fun. And then when I went back with my team in the fall, man, oh man, the difference, right? It was great. There wasn't anybody saying, oh, that's not safe. No, we just played, man. We just played.
Yep. Played in.
That's amazing.
Storms. I remember at Democracy Park in Westfield, it was a torrential downpour, and we played 3-on-3, and it did not matter. We just kept on going, because that was the element. You had the natural elements against you, playing against you, but also for you. It just depends how you used it. And you didn't care how drenched you were, and you sure got an earful when you got home, but they knew that you were out there playing what you loved to play, because everybody did.
I agree. Absolutely. I love to play too. I played with my dad. I played with my uncle. My best friend's father is from Germany. When they moved from the Bronx to Chappaqua in Westchester County, um, watched my best friend play AYSO there. Also watched his dad play, I guess over 40 pickup game or something, or it was regulated. I don't remember what it was, but he played. And then, I just played for fun whenever I went to visit him up in Chappaqua. So, I mean,
Chappaqua is still a great soccer town. It's a great soccer
yeah,
town.
That's
Huge.
great.
Yeah. Westchester is thriving. Westchester's thriving. Bergen County is thriving. Nassau County is thriving. The 5 boroughs are bursting at the seams with the beautiful game. And
Yeah.
there is no question about it, right? It was marginal. It was culturally irrelevant. There were great people involved, and they're still involved, and they're still connected with it, right? That sustained the game through that dry spell. But again, I think the documentary really captures that massive injection into pop culture with soccer that just made it the thing that, that's what we were playing. My friends, James's friends, right? That's what we were playing. Even 1v1, even 1v1.
My brother gave me a birthday gift a few years ago. It was an envelope with a series of photos in it. There were pictures of my grandfather meeting Pelé in Rye, New York. I believe it is that where Pepsi is headquartered or was headquartered.
Valhalla.
It's close to it.
Okay.
Yeah, so in other words, Rye would be
Valhalla, New York.
Rye
So
would be
that's a little more north or south, I think.
Well, it's actually like in Purchase, the Pepsi,
Okay, yes.
right by Valhalla, right? Valhalla, Purchase, where Manhattanville College is, which is where Pelé had his soccer camps. And you mentioned Arnie Ramirez before. Arnie Ramirez was the camp director for Cosmos owned Pelé Soccer Camps of America. Soccer Camps of America had the Pelé camp, the Canalia camp, the Werner Roth Soccer Safari camp. And Rye would have been a place and still would be in Westchester, right? When Rocco Camiso bought the Cosmos, he had a big event in Rye at a country club to invite everybody in the Westchester soccer community to, say, okay, Cosmos have new ownership, please support us, that kind of a thing. So it would have been a place where Pepsi would have hosted whatever. And again, that's the thing too. I remember as a kid, and this is, in those late 70 years, I moved from New York to Memphis in 75, and I came back to New York in 1980. But I remember a couple times in Memphis where we all gathered in the cafeteria, and they put a screen up, and they projected the film Pelé, the Man, the Master and His Method, which was written by Paul Gardner, actually. Paul Gardner, the great writer, Paul Gardner. Was the one who wrote the script for that film, and that was funded by Pepsi. And so there was a real, again, corporate synergy there in terms of, Coca-Cola did its deal with FIFA, Pepsi did its deal with Pelé. And the Master and His Method still to this day is for my money, the best instructional video for how to play the game. In many ways, Pelé was going, when he joined the Cosmos, he was such a missionary for the beautiful game. He went out and did clinics and camps all over the place. New Jersey, Westchester, but then, the Cosmos would play Tulsa, right? And our friend Gabe Logan, great soccer historian, Gabe Logan, he was at a clinic that Pelé gave in Tulsa, Oklahoma when he was a kid, right? and he's written this amazing book on Chicago soccer history, just a tremendous scholar. But he had that engagement with the king at the local soccer field in Oklahoma because the Cosmos happened to be playing the Roughnecks. I mean, this is what was happening in communities all around the country to really lay the seeds at the grassroots. So you're not just borrowing a baseball field; you actually have a soccer field now.
I would dare to say that the core group of the Society for American Soccer History, we were all influenced by that era, by the NASL, by the Cosmos, and by Pelé. So it really stirred something up in you
And now look where we are. MLS, USL, all these little small division leagues like NPSL, the League for Clubs, the amateur game has been tremendously improving. UPSL has been fantastic. We had a World Cup in 1994, and very soon this summer, we're going to have our second round of hosting a World Cup with our friends in Canada and Mexico. Could you ever fathom this explosion now that started? I mean, obviously, it's been here. It's been here, for such a long, long time, but it's never had that sustainability until, now. And now we're having a secondary World Cup coming on our shores, guys. How does that make you feel? Not just for the history of the game in this country, but as an American fan of the game, how does that make you feel, guys? James and then David.
I just think that, as we've all, that line that we're always saying is that, soccer in America, it's an immigrant story. So when you've got the chance of having a second World Cup come to our shores, in North America, whether it's Canada, Mexico, or the U.S., we're all mixed together throughout all of these games in these wonderful communities. And what's great is that you could be sitting in a bar watching one of these matches, and the person next to you has no idea about the game, but they're there and they're sitting and and you just start that conversation. So people really, they want to know more. And it doesn't matter if they don't know anything about it. They love the atmosphere that's surrounding it. And then that makes them want to know more. And our game is improving, leaps and bounds. And it's great to have this competition with all of the other leagues, especially USL. I believe I love the way that they innovate and they take risks and they say, listen, we want to make an impact and do what other leagues aren't doing. So,
yeah, I agree. I would say, I'm intensely ambivalent in that, I'm really proud of what we've achieved, but I also look back at all the missed opportunities and misjudgments, right? And feel like, okay, now finally at last, it's going to, the beautiful game can take its due place if things are managed right. And again, that's very much in crisis, right? Honestly, in 1994, as things were just about to kick off, some guys driving in a white Ford Bronco, and there's helicopters hovering over, following it, and the nation becomes obsessed with that. And soccer was competing with that horribly, I don't want to call it tragic story, but awful story that really captured the imaginations and the focus of pop culture. And the baseball strike immediately thereafter, right, was a great opportunity to relaunch pro soccer here. And that was an opportunity missed and deferred by a year. And while we've got these beautiful stadia all around the country, we've also got a lot of empty seats at a lot of local games too. We've still got a long ways to go, and I don't want the opportunity to be missed by some stupid Ford Bronco or, the kind of horrible scenes that we had over the correspondence dinner the other night where, where violence threatens to pull our attention.
Exactly. We can't have that.
I want the attention to be on the game, not on greed. I want the attention to be on the game, not on corruption. I want the attention to be on unity, not what divides us. And, we call it soccer because it's the association code of football, the football association. And associativity means coming together. Clubs that were playing football in different ways, right? Maybe you pick up the ball and run with it. Maybe you kick each other in the shins, whatever, maybe you have to kick it under a bar. Maybe you kick it over a bar. Maybe whatever the different rules were in different villages. The industrialization and railways make it possible for people from one town to go play against people from another town. And those clubs playing different ways agree to come to a common set of rules, and you've got the schism between different codes of football. I don't think American football is necessarily good for American society. I really don't. I know that's a bold claim, and maybe it's more politic to say, oh, the sports can coexist. I think it's better if more of us are playing soccer, and I think it's better for the planet. I really believe that. I believe that deep in my heart, and that's the stakes. That's the stakes here in terms of American society, global society. We need to be gracious hosts, and we need to put on a great games. And I just hope that nothing interferes with that, so that we can really maximize the potential and see the growth in the game that honestly I really expected when I was a kid. So to answer your question in the most succinct manner possible, yes, I did imagine that. I've been imagining it. That's my dream, is for soccer to be the preeminent sport in America, which is the stated mission of U.S. soccer. I really believe that, and every day I work with that goal in mind. I don't want to blow this opportunity. We've got to make the most of it. We got to work together.
Exactly.
We've got to associate. We got to work together and make sure that this opportunity isn't spoiled.
Exactly. And we will end it there from, of course, David Kilpatrick and James Brown joining me to talk about not only the great documentary done by ITN and along with TNT and Turner, but of course, all the wonderful history that we had to reminisce about back in the day. I will say this before I sign off. I was happy to see, of course, I always told everyone, every time I go to the Cosmos games, Bugs Bunny was always on the pitch, on the field at Giant Stadium running around. And thank goodness there was actual video evidence. It was filmed. So whoever said I was full of it, you can watch that and you can see it for your own eyes, my friends. That was fantastic. Once again, from the Society of American Soccer History, S.A.S.H, James Brown, David Kilpatrick. Gentlemen, I thank you for your time. Obviously, we can do a 2-hour show on this, but unfortunately, I know you two are very busy with your own daily lives. Thank you again, and thank you for joining me. Thank you for this wonderful trip down memory lane.
Always such a pleasure to speak with you, Daniel. Always great to chat with James. So this has been really fun. Thanks a lot, Daniel.
All right, I'm back live here. Welcome back to the American Soccer Show. I want to thank once again Dr. David Kilpatrick and James Brown from S.A.S.H, Society of American Soccer History. Just wonderful things to talk about. And those two are actually in the documentary on TNT. You know, the one thing that really struck me amazingly was that the ASL was that strong back in the day before the depression hit and wiped out the club scene of American soccer in those days. And that's a real shame, because if the Great Depression did not happen, then maybe, maybe this is the game that is elevated along with baseball. And maybe the NFL is not as big as it is now. But look, we can't change history. We just have to admit that things have, come in and interfered with the game. And maybe the American Soccer League would have been this league that would have been around for over 100 years. And maybe we'd be celebrating 100 years of the American Soccer League instead of 30 years of MLS. Not saying I don't want MLS to be around. Obviously, I'm happy that MLS is around. I'm happy we have all these American soccer leagues that are around. But still, though, it just feels like it just feels like that this is the right thing. It just feels like that this is the situation that that we are in right now. And but still, you'd like to see what was going on. You like to see what's happening. So that's all you can do, and that's all you can go about. Now it's time to talk about New York Red Bulls taking this past week. Of course, they have matches that were played midweek against DC United at Sports Illustrated Stadium, and then on the weekend at FC Cincinnati. First, let's go to the midweek game, and that is, of course, Red Bulls 4, DC United 4. Big match for Julian Hall, scored his 6th goal in league play, 8 in all competitions. Ronald Doncourt got his goal, make it 2-0 at the time. Ty Baribo, of course, gets the hat trick, but he made it 2-1 in the 37th minute. And Jorge Ruvalcaba gets his brace, 52nd minute to make it 3-1. And then the whole craziness happened afterwards. Jackson Hopkins made it 3-2. Baribo made it 3-3. Jorge Ruvalcaba regained the lead to make it 4-3. Baribo made it 4-4, and that was the end of it. Maybe it should have been 5-4. Red Bulls should have been 5-4 DC, but it did not happen. And we had ourselves a damn good match. But if you're a Red Bull supporter, that's not a good match, because you should have won this game. Red Bull should have won this game. They should have buried DC United. They just had that one substitution that kind of just changed everything. And the defense just went completely out of nowhere. And it just fell apart. And you can't play like that. You can't play with a lead. And then all of a sudden, you fall apart in front of everyone and you give up 2 points. They nearly gave up 3 points if the foul was not called on the shove on Veloter. So, I mean, he gets shoved down by the DC attacker. And the goal does not count to make it 5-4. So, thankfully for that. But still, though, that shouldn't have happened. And we all know the player on loan from Red Bull Leipzig, Joyous Bungie, or Bungie, however you want to pronounce it. Once he came in, he looked lost out there. And then he started in the match on Saturday against FC Cincinnati. And, he gets his yellow card early in the match in the 19th minute. But then all of a sudden, he causes those 2 goals to happen. Obviously, Kevin Denke getting that one. Kevin Buka gets a nice ball. Bungie comes up too close to Buka. He gets nutmegged and whizzed by. And then Denke just has a wide open net and puts it in, makes it 1-0. And then Bungie does it again. He lunges inside the penalty area inside the 5th minute of 5 in the second half stoppage time. And then Denke just buries it to make it 2-0. And then you get Bungie subbed out. Here comes Matthew Dos Santos, who got subbed out halfway, at halftime of the Red Bull game against DC, and then gets subbed back into the Cincinnati game on Saturday, and he nearly scores a golazo. I mean, he could have nailed that sucker in on the free kick. He just hits the front post, and I mean, that looked like it was going in. And unfortunately, he hits the post, and it just went just nothing in that match. And when they did bring back the big boys because of the roster rotation for their Open Cup matchup this Wednesday against NYCFC for the round 4 game, the fourth round game. It just goes to show you that this could have been a Red Bulls victory, or it could have been points. It could have been a draw. Could have been a win. Should have been a win. But unfortunately, they put in someone who I felt probably shouldn't have been in there in the first place. But then again, look, this is Michael Bradley's call, and there's nothing you can say or do. You always give out an opinion, but it's nothing more you can say or do. And everything just fell apart in the second half against DC United and in the opening half against FC Cincinnati on the road. So we'll see what happens now. Obviously, Red Bulls, once again, Open Cup this Wednesday night against NYCFC for the Hudson River Derby. And then they're going to play FC Dallas on the weekend. And then they're going to honor Bradley Wright Phillips. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for watching my show this afternoon. I want to thank once again from the Society of American Soccer History, S.A.S.H, Dr. David Kilpatrick, and James Brown. My name is Daniel Feuerstein. Thank you very much for watching me today. And you can rewatch this show once again on YouTube when everything is all over and done with. Once again, my name is Daniel Feuerstein. Thank you very much for watching me today. And as always, to please enjoy your football. Thank you. Take care so long. Have a good day, and bye-bye for now. Enjoy tonight, as we are going to have another Open Cup night across America. Bye-bye for now.